Erin and Katie. I'm really excited to be chatting with you guys today, and please feel free to ask questions at any point, and I'm sure Erin and Katie will relay those over to me. I am going to start with a little bit of a disclaimer today. We are going to mention politics in this session, and we're going to try hard not to use our political bias when we're talking about it, but it is a hot topic right now, and it has a ton to do with digital bias, and how some of the things that have happened recently are allowed to happen and how they steamroll. So we will talk about that some. But to get started, here's a little bit about me. I have been working in marketing and media for over 15 years. I do everything from design websites to post social media for brands to run advertising campaigns all over the United States. So that really does give me some insight into the back end of how a lot of this internet stuff works and how advertisers and news organizations and a little bit of everybody are using targeting and marketing to get their information to you. And I kind of geek out on it. So I will try not to geek out on you too much, but you know, the analytics and data behind the internet are fascinating to me. And, you know, I just love to like think about how it all works and how it comes together. And what we really want to talk about today is bias. And the first thing I'll say is usually when people hear the word bias, they immediately think it's bad. Bias is not inherently a bad thing. It might be a good thing. The important thing to know about bias is you just need to know what your biases are. If you're aware of them, you know how they're influencing the way you talk, the way you interact with other people, and even what you see online. So let's kind of talk about that a little bit deeper. You know, when you see this image of broccoli, you probably had some sort of quick reaction. It might be that you love broccoli, or it might be that you hate broccoli. Both of those reactions are biases, and it influences what you think when you see this picture. Your mouth may water, or you may be waiting for me to get it off the screen as quickly as possible. So I'm going to read this definition from Psychology Today about bias because I thought it was the best kind of overall description out there. And it's that a bias is a tendency, inclination, or prejudice toward or against something or someone. Some biases are positive and helpful, like eating healthy foods or staying away from someone that has knowingly caused harm. But biases can often be based on stereotypes rather than actual knowledge of an individual or circumstance. Whether positive or negative, such cognitive shortcuts can result in prejudgments that lead to your decision-making or even discriminatory practices. So the goal here is understanding that because of something that happened to you in the past, or something that you've seen, or something that you've heard, you could make a conclusion about a future thing before you really even come in contact with it. And that is the element of what a bias is. Bias definitely relates to your digital footprint. But before you can really think about how those two things intertwine, it's important to think about what your digital footprint really is. So think about all the things you do online. Take a look at this list. All of these elements are part of your digital footprint. It's everything that you've touched on the internet. It's comments on social media. It's getting on a Zoom call like this one because you had to log in, so it's tracked. It's using apps. It's sending and receiving emails. It's part of your search history when you use browsers on the internet. And it's pretty much completely unavoidable unless you throw your phone in the trash and never go on a computer again. So you can't not have a digital footprint, but what you want to do is understand your digital footprint and know that every time you interact with or touch one of these things are actually interacting back with you. They're tracking information such as your age, your preferences, things that you like, keywords that you use on the internet, where you use your phone. One of the fun little tracking things that keeps you safe, that's probably a positive bias, is your credit card company will send you an alert or call you if they think your credit card number has been stolen and there's a fraudulent charge. A lot of times when you look at that charge, it's somewhere nowhere near where you live. They can identify that charge based on things you've bought in the past, but also by the fact that you didn't get in your car and buy gas as you drove across the country to visit that store, or you didn't buy a plane ticket to fly to an airport near that store. So they know that you weren't physically in that location because you didn't have any other of these buying triggers that told them you were there. And that's all part of your digital footprint. One of the most fun things you can do on the internet to really kind of see how a digital footprint works is to go to Google and type in something that you would never care about. Search, purple elephants, or I don't know, make something up that you would just have no interest in at all. Start clicking links related to this thing. Now pay attention over the next couple of days to the types of ads and content that show up when you visit browsers, or when you play games on your phone, or when you go on social media. You'll start to see elements of that stuff you searched. If those companies or anybody involved in that product or thing is actually trying to market toward you. The hard part is it can take months for that to forget you. So I'd be careful what you search, because it's going to follow you for a little while. So here's where we get political. And I think this is the biggest example of how your digital bias can impact you. It's really easy to say that you get news that you want to see. In the old days, you picked up a newspaper or you watched TV to get the news, and they were really the only sources of that news. And those sources didn't interact back with you. So what was there was what it was, and you saw everything. And if you didn't want to see it, you pretty much just had to throw it away or turn the TV off. Now, news and information comes at you from all kinds of sources. It's on YouTube, it's on Facebook, it's on Instagram. We're even advertising on TikTok now. And all of those pieces are coming from things that you have somehow said you're interested in. Where this comes together for the news and why this becomes a political issue is whichever party affiliation you have or political leanings you have, you're probably much more likely to click on stories, news, or even candidate websites that fall in line with your beliefs. Seems like a pretty natural and pretty harmless thing. The problem is that all of the internet searches, all of the social media advertising and Google advertising and all of the digital media that's coming back at you has seen that you're interested in those things. So they give you more of those things. The more of those things you continue to click, the more of those things you continue to see, all the way to the point where you might not even see things for the other candidate or the other opinion. I go back and think about during this past election cycle, there were a couple candidates consistently in my social media feeds that were asking for donations or asking for volunteers or asking for support. They all had the same political leaning. And it's not because all of those people were the only ones advertising. It's because my tendencies had set up all of the targeting so that I only got that information. So I'm only seeing one piece of the picture instead of the whole picture. That's my bias. And so that's where understanding bias and digital footprint at the same time is so very, very important. It can be a lot of fun, such as I saw this really cool pair of shoes, and now every time that pair of shoes goes on sale, I get an ad for it. Eventually I'm going to probably buy them. But it can also be a little bit of a challenge in that you don't know all sides or all opinions or everything going on with an issue because you're only paying attention to the thing that you already agree with. The nice thing about being in college is you are in a place where there's so much open idea and thought and talk about stuff that it's hopefully spiked your curiosity to search things that aren't necessarily things you already think. And that's one way to kind of combat the bias. So we're going to look at this chart here. And this is a list of most of the major media organizations in the world, kind of playing off that political theme. The 5 columns represent the political leaning of the media organization. So if you look at that big purple C in the middle, that's your news outlets that are known to be the most down the middle. They're not reporting the news with one side or another. It's straight facts. And you'll notice that's also the smallest column in this chart. On either side, you have more left-leaning media outlets and more right-leaning media outlets. So when you click on the news, if you always click on Slate, for example, which is in the far left blue column, you're going to continue to get more news and more information that tends to follow the same philosophy and beliefs as Slate, which is a more left-leaning media organization. If you click on more stuff from The Federalist, which is all the way on the other side, you're going to get more of that right-leaning news. You're probably also going to get targeted advertisements from people with more right-wing ideologies asking for donations or to volunteer. So it impacts everything you see. The other thing to take really close note of in this chart is there are some media organizations that are in 2 different columns. Excuse me. That's the difference between their news coverage and their commentary. It's really common to turn on TV or turn on YouTube and some guy is just standing on screen, just talking about an issue nonstop, right? Like they're just telling you what they think about it. That's commentary. That's not necessarily news. While there may be facts in that commentary, and while that commentary may not be right or wrong per se, it isn't necessarily a fair and balanced look at an issue or an event. So pay attention to that as well. Are you watching or clicking on news coverage, or are you paying attention to that commentary coverage? Because that will also kind of adjust the view that you get of the world. So my advice to you right here is if you were worried about your own political bias and you're sitting here thinking, oh my gosh, I got all of my ads during the political season from the same candidate, and I'm not really sure what the other side thinks about an issue that I believe in strongly. Go to one of the media organizations on the opposite side of the chart from where you are and read it. Arm yourself with information so that you'll get more information and you'll start to pull down some of those filter bubbles. Because what will happen at that point is then you'll start to get more stuff from essentially both sides of the aisle or both sides of an issue. It's almost as simple as having rival sports teams. I subscribe to, I'm a Virginia Tech grad, and so I, follow all of the Virginia Tech sports things. My feed does not have UVA sports in it ever, never, ever, except for when someone from Tech is talking about how we beat UVA. But heading into a big game, maybe you want to know what they're thinking. Maybe you want to know about their strategy. So then you happen to hop over to the Virginia sports site and take a peek. This is something I do a couple times a year, usually when there's a big rivalry game coming up. And what I'll immediately notice is all of a sudden, there are ads in my feed for UVA tumblers or shirts or flags So it shows you where that bias is creeping in. And you'll end up with a really strange feed when you're starting to click back and forth across these things. But it's a fun experiment to help you understand your own bias and where that bias comes from. And this is why it matters so much, because not only does it impact maybe what you're seeing or thinking about current events, which couldn't be more true at any point in time than probably is today, but it also impacts your buying power and your shopping decisions and the things that you actually see and know about. So as a digital marketer and working with targeted ads, I am constantly sending out pieces of information, videos, text, links to blogs to certain groups of people that I think would find it most relevant. Some of you may have even found this program because you saw it in Facebook, or your mom might have saw it in Facebook and told you about it. So none of that was by accident. That was all dedicated targeting based on people who probably would have an interest. So you need to be aware of the fact that all this information you put out there actually comes back to you in a certain way. So let's think about where that information comes from for a minute. And that's how you can kind of figure out what your bias might look like. And I like to do an exercise, usually about once a year, where I think about myself and kind of go through some of these steps to see what I might be doing to influence what I'm seeing online. So key tracking comes from social media. So the first step is to think about all the different social media accounts you have. And then how many of them are you active on? And then on those accounts, who do you follow? It's less about your friends here and more about public figures or brands. Then from there, think about how often you like or comment. Liking shows a proclivity for a certain thing. So if I like Coca-Cola's post all the time, I'm going to get more ads and more targeting for probably other sodas, maybe fast food, maybe less healthy choices than if I was interacting consistently with Chobani. So think about that. The other part of that then is your commenting. So you're using, when you comment, it's full of words. Those keywords also show what you're interested in or not interested in, or the way that you feel and the temperature of what you're saying. So if you are constantly all caps typing in comments somewhere, most of the rest of the web is reading you as a charged personality. So if you're a charged personality and you are constantly posting about tennis shoes, they are really going to hit you hard with tennis shoe stuff because they think that you have such a bias toward that already that you are going to make a purchase. So the things you do are impacting now what you see and how frequently you see it. Other things that impact that are just carrying your phone in your pocket. We aren't doing it here in the Roanoke market yet, but some of the bigger markets in the United States, I know they're doing it around the Atlanta area. They actually, every phone has a unique tracking number in it. And so you do things on your phone. So like I drive a Toyota. So I have the Toyota app on my phone. So I could drive by a little, what they call a beacon on the side of the road, which essentially scans my phone data really fast. It doesn't know who I am. It just knows I have a phone in a vehicle with a Toyota app. So now the billboard, the digital billboard 2 miles down the road may switch over to say, buy a new Toyota, because 10 Toyota people drove by in the last 20 minutes. So it knows enough about the person with the piece of technology to serve a certain type of ad at a certain time in a certain location. It's terrifying and wonderful all at once because I'm a Toyota person. So I'm like, oh, that's really cool. That car on that billboard looks just like mine. But at the same time, I'm like, oh, now I don't know about other types of cars because I'm only seeing cars that look like my car. So you can see how the bias can be great and not great at the exact same time. And then the final piece of this is thinking about one of those things that makes our life easy, which is being able to log into everything because we have a Google account or a Facebook account or a Twitter account. Well, everything you do on those social media channels and everybody you follow and everything you like feeds into whatever other thing you are now logging into as well. Don't think these products don't share data and don't talk to each other because they do. We can find commonalities everywhere among users. And it isn't at the granular level of knowing that Carrie likes purple and she drives a Toyota and she had spaghetti for dinner. It's not that small and attached to me, but it's enough to know that a woman in Virginia kind of starts to fit this profile. So you just have to think about how comfortable you are with what marketers and news organizations and others may be able to glean from you because of what you've done. And again, you may totally love it. You may love only seeing ads that are for things that you are interested in. But the flip side is if there's a big national issue going on, such as what we're dealing with in our country right now, do you know enough about what the people that don't think like you think to feel informed enough to really have a good grasp on the issues? And so really what it comes down to is the world has pretty much become a self-select ice cream bar. You get to pick what you see, whether you realize it or not. And, in a session like this, just understanding or even thinking about the things that can impact what you see. I was talking with my dad about it a few days ago, and he was like, wait a minute, that happens because I did this thing on the internet. And I'm like, yeah, that's exactly how that happens. And a lot of people don't necessarily make those correlations. So having the knowledge to know that anything you do or click or touch or like or post impacts everything you see from that point forward gives you a better grasp. You will now understand kind of the basic rules of engagement in this big game online so that you have the tools to protect yourself and feel better about what you're doing. So really think about it for a minute. What are the real implications of only seeing things that reinforce what you already think, what you already like, what you already believe, and what you already understand? If you really let that sink in for a minute, it's a really, really big question. And on different days, you might be able to argue different answers. What it all comes down to is basic bias. Do you only want to know what you know right now? Or do you want to expand your horizon? And that's where you self-select. That's how you self-select. By clicking different types of information, by searching things you don't know the answer to, and by opting in to things that maybe don't always align with what you think, but because you want to be armed with that information. So here's your checklist for today. If you want to figure out how to keep your digital footprint as clean and unbiased as possible, that's where we all are, right? At the end of the day is, okay, so I know I'm biased. We're all biased. So how do we understand and best use that? And how do we keep too much of this tracking from influencing the way we think and feel? And my top bit of advice is just be a good digital citizen, right? Like, don't be a troll. Nobody likes a troll. You won't be happy as a troll. I can almost guarantee it. So be kind, helpful, and understanding. You know, my grandmother always said, if you don't have something nice to say, don't say it at all. That applies to the internet more than any other place in your life, because something you say that is unkind today could come back and bite you in a job interview 20 years from now. So if it's not nice, if it's not helpful, if it's not understanding, and if it doesn't have a purpose, just don't say it. Or sit at your computer and say it out loud to your computer. Just don't ever type it in anywhere. Use privacy settings for all of your apps and your social media accounts and your email accounts, and be fluent in those privacy settings. You know, some of the things that make these tools fun, such as always leaving the location enabled, also give up a lot of your personal data. So make sure you, even if you choose to leave that location setting enabled, just know what it's doing if you do. Keep a list of accounts you have. And if you have an account that you're not using anymore, go ahead and get rid of it. That old data can hang around and it can influence and it can make you subject of a privacy breach somewhere down the line later. So know where you are online and what your things look like. Be careful what you share. You know, there are a lot of folks out there that don't post the name or the faces of their children on the internet, because we just don't know what facial recognition is going to do down the road, or how it's going to be able to read those children's faces when they might become adults, or what it could associate a child with today when they're an adult down the line. So, you know, I share on social media a lot, but I'm very particular in what those things are. So just think about, you know, kind of the threshold is, would you do it in front of your mom in real life? And if you wouldn't share it in front of your mom in real life, maybe you shouldn't share it on social media. And maybe there are steps that go even further than that, but really think about that. I make an annual habit to Google myself. You don't know what's out there about you if you haven't checked. You don't have to do it in such a way that it just feeds your ego for the next, 6 months, but search your name. You know, there have been a ton of people who have found, that their identity was stolen by someone because they found it on Google. Or maybe you have a really common name and you can't find yourself at all. So just look. You never know. If you have common social media platforms, LinkedIn in particular always ranks fairly high on Google, you will see yourself. And anything you do on LinkedIn can be associated there on Google. So anything you post on that social media account, your profile photo, it can all show up. Monitor linked accounts. So if you use Facebook to sign in to every other thing on the planet, every so often go into the settings of Facebook and make sure all the apps that you've allowed access are apps you actually allowed access, and that you are actually still using them. It's just important to kind of know what's talking to what. And if you have a master password you're using everywhere, this might be a good time to think about that too. If somebody hacks one of those accounts, do they have your whole life? Just a little piece of advice there. Use a secondary anonymous email. So since most of you are college students, you probably all have a .edu account with your school name. I'm guessing because that's not the first email address you ever had. You also have something else that you created before that might be your primary email source. And what I would say is, the closer you get to the working world and the closer you get to having to do all this stuff online, that I have a junk account is what I call it. And that's the one I use when I go to a store and need to sign up for an email or shop online or any of this kind of stuff that isn't related to my core function. So my primary email, like I get my bank information there, and that's where my friends will email me. But that secondary email is what I give to everybody else in the world. You can almost think about it as giving, that fake phone number to somebody you're probably not going to go out with later. That's what your secondary email address is for. This is one nobody does, but it's important to say. at least look at the terms and conditions. You know, we've had a whole lot of debate, especially in the last week or so, about social media usage and what's allowed and what's not allowed. Well, most of the terms and conditions make that exorbitantly clear what is and isn't allowed. Whether you like it or not, you signed up for it by signing up for the account. So as you do these things, read the terms and conditions. If their terms and conditions aren't something that you're comfortable with, maybe you're not comfortable with being on that platform. So really think about that on the front end, not after they've made you mad because they took down your post. Consider everything you do anywhere on the internet public at all times, even if you have a private account. I can screen grab anything that anybody sends me, whether their account is private or not. Then I can go publish it somewhere else. I could make it public. So just because you have a private account somewhere doesn't mean that no one can see it. So keep that in mind. And then if you really want to pay attention to what you're seeing and kind of experience a targetless environment where you're not getting all the tracking and the cookies and everything that comes with the internet, consider using a private browser for certain things that you do online, especially in political times. If you don't want to get a politically biased account of the news based on your search history, use a private browser to look up those things. DuckDuckGo is a really popular one, and it doesn't allow the rest of the internet to do a lot of the same tracking that the more public browsers do. You know, Google is kind of the world standard, and Google is awesome, and we all love Google, but Google is also the biggest advertising platform in the world. So every piece of data you put into Google, somebody is using back. And it's kind of a hard thing to think about because you don't want to give up the ease and the function of Google, but do you really want Google to have all that information so that they can in turn allow advertisers to buy access to your inbox or your search history or your social media feed? So something to think about there. And I have talked a ton, and I'd like to know what questions you have or what's on your mind or what you think about all this digital stuff. So I'm going to open it up to questions.
And I am going to go ahead and stop the recording so that you guys.
Thank you. Now I can say anything.